let's talk about structuring a deal. We're probably not going to get through all of this. We only have 35 minutes left, but we do want to move into structuring a deal because this is a lot of people have asked about this. So we looked at the different ways you evaluate a company, quantitative, qualitative ways. Let's talk about like what are the levers that we or a buyer can use when they're thinking about making that offer. Let's just say they found the company, they're confident in the company, they're ready to buy them. What are the things they need to be thinking about from a offer standpoint? I mean, Matthew, I remember when we were buying our first one out of state. So it was 2016. We were buying in Nashville. And I remember us sitting around a room thinking about 3 or 4 different ways to make the offer and saying, okay, well, here are some things that we can adjust and let the seller decide which way they wanted to do it. So what are the things they can be thinking about?
Yeah, I think it's really important to understand, like, if you're going to buy a business, you need to find out what is important to that seller. If you are just focused on price, you're missing the thing. Because it's very important. Like the things that we know that are important to seller other than price are what's going to happen with their team, what's going to happen to their portfolio. Like, how are you going to manage? Like, they want to make sure that that you check a lot of these boxes. And as a buyer, you need to know absolutely what's important to the seller. And so, that way you can kind of like structure a deal that meets the seller's needs. And that, again, there are sellers out there, if you can believe this, that aren't interested in top value. There's other things that are more important to them, and that's okay because it's their business and they can, whatever can be important to them. So Josh, why don't you jump in on structuring a deal? Because again, you do this every day.
Yeah, people definitely want to know about like clawbacks, earn-out, not all that stuff.
Oh yeah. So let's go ahead and hit some definitions real quick. Again, a lot of people might be familiar with all of these, but just in case, when we're talking about deals, a couple of things are going to come into play. First is going to be in almost every deal that's done, you're going to have a non-compete and a non-solicitation agreement that's going to come as a part of that deal. The non-compete just means that they will not be in competition with you in the same line of business that you're in. Non-solicitation is that they won't reach out to your acquired employees or clients in that portfolio. Can also be restricted to vendors and all sorts of things. Non-competition, very important though. Average time for a non-compete is 3 or 4 years. It ranges. We've seen them as low as 2 years, as high as 5 years. The average is 3 or 4 years though, just right in the middle. So non-compete, non-solicitations, almost always going to be a part of the deal. And then you got the type of deal structure, which clawback is the number one thing that people kind of talk about the most. And so I want to go through a couple of ways that people structure deals to alleviate themselves of as much risk as possible. All of these things are effectively the same. They just go by different names. So a clawback is, by way of its definition, is exactly what it sounds like. It's where you go in and you say, all right, I'm going to pay you X amount of money. We'll just say $1 million for your business. But over the course of a period of time, usually is going to be anywhere between 90 days to a year. If you are to lose anyone in that portfolio, you have got to pay me back the amount of money that I've paid you. So again, let's presume a cash deal. Somebody comes in and they pay cash. They pay you $1 million, and let's just say for the sake of conversation, that you've got 100 units. Well, that would be $10,000 a unit that somebody's paying you. And so let's say that 6 months in, you lose an owner that has 8 units. Well, now you are going to be required to pay back to the acquirer $80,000. So that is the definition of a clawback, is actually going back and trying to claw that back. Now, a lot of times these are not cash deals. Matter of fact, the overwhelming majority of the time, these deals are not structured as cash deals. A lot of the times they're structured as a seller finance deal. And the way that they will recover that amount of money is they will take it out of future payments. So in that $1 million deal, you pay somebody $250,000 down potentially, and you finance the balance over 3 years. Those monthly payments are whatever they are, $10,000 or $15,000 a month. If you lose $80,000, then that person is going to take back that amount out of every monthly payout until they have received that clawback amount back. So clawing it back is literally just saying, hey, I was going to give you this, I'm going to take it back now. A different way that people do that is they will escrow the funds. So they'll come in and say, well, I think that there's a certain amount of this portfolio that's at risk. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay you for $1 million for the business, but I'm only going to give you $500,000 at closing. And then I'm going to escrow the other $500,000 for 90 days, 6 months, a year, whatever that amount is. And so long as either the portfolio is performing, so it's creating the revenue that we projected it will, or so many units stay in the portfolio, or it doesn't fall below a certain threshold, then we will release those escrow funds at X date. And then there's usually going to be some wording in there that says, on like a prorated basis, whatever amount will go back to the buyer and a certain amount will go to the seller if some has fallen out, but it hasn't reached the full escrow threshold. Also, you've got a revenue pass-through. So a way that people will de-risk the acquisition is they'll just do a revenue pass-through. So they'll go in and say, instead of paying you up front, what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give you whatever revenues I receive in property management fees and in leasing fees and XYZ, whatever's agreed upon. I'm going to just pass through those revenues to you for a period of time. Or they may say, so if the deal was going to be a 1 times revenue or 1.2 times revenue, they may say, well, I'm going to pass through the revenue for that for 12 months or 14 months. Or they may say, I'm going to pass through half of the revenue over 24 months or 28 months or 30 months. So a revenue pass-through is a way that it's used. Another is an earn-out. And so this is usually kind of seen as a way to compromise. If somebody is saying, okay, my business is worth $3 million, but as a buyer, you feel like it's only worth $2 million, then you may go in and say, all right, well, what I'm going to do is I'm going to pay you $2 million. And if this portfolio performs the way that, you are saying it's going to, or that I believe that it can, or whatever that winds up being, then you will earn an amount greater than the purchase price if XYZ conditions are met. So there are a lot of different ways to structure the deal, but those are typically the terms that you're going to hear are going to be revolved around that. So when it comes to deal structures, kind of bringing it back, there are 2 different types of acquisitions. You're either going to have an entity purchase or you're going to have an asset purchase. An entity purchase means that you're going in and you're buying the entire corporation. So XYZ Property Management LLC, you're going to go in and you're buying XYZ Property Management LLC and everything that it has. So in that situation, XYZ Property Management LLC is the owner of the management agreements they have. They're the owner of their intellectual property, so on and so forth. And so you're going to buy the entire entity. But when you do that, you're buying all of the assets, but you're also buying all of the liabilities, not just future liabilities, but any prior liabilities. And so it's a different process to go through buying an entity versus what is far more common in the property management industry, which is an asset purchase. In an asset purchase, you are not buying the property management or XYZ Property Management LLC. You're buying all of the management agreements and whatever other assets are agreed upon in the sale. Usually in most property management companies, there are not going to be tangible assets. There can be, if you want to include office furniture and equipment and computers and that sort of thing. Occasionally, there may be a maintenance truck that's going to be purchased, but most of the time, they are intangible assets. They're going to be the management agreements. They're going to be...
We're actually going to sell Spencer when we sell this business. Spencer's going to go with it. So if anybody wants to buy Evernest, you'll get Spencer as an asset.
I've been looking for a way out of this place. That's perfect.
No. You're going with the place. That's my point.
Oh, well, as long as you're not with it, that's fine.
So if anybody wants to buy Evernest and or Spencer, please.
You get Spencer. It's like BOGO, buy one, get one.
In an asset purchase, it's usually going to be property management agreement that you're buying along with your intellectual property and a lot of your trade name, trademark, logo, website, phone numbers, those sorts of things are going to come with the acquisition. And so you're either going to have one of those two. It's either going to be an entity purchase or an asset purchase. And then within the entity or the asset purchase, they're going to be structured usually one of two ways. It's either going to be an all cash deal where you're going to come in and you're going to say, okay, so long as nothing, is materially changed from the time that we sign a letter of intent to the time of closing. At closing, you're going to get X amount of dollar in cash, and then the transaction's complete. The other way, which is probably the far more common way, is that you have a deal that's structured as seller financing, where usually industry standard is going to be 25% down and then the balance paid over 3 years. Now, the balance can be paid over 3 years, either monthly, it can be paid quarterly, it can be paid annually in annual installments. But a lot of these deals are seller financed, where the buyer is going to pay a certain amount up front and then they're going to owner finance or seller finance the majority over a period of time. That period of time is really dependent on your ability to pay it back. What is your cash flow position going to be? Are you going to be able to service the debt on that over a shorter period of time? You could pay it back over 18 months. You could pay it back over 36 months. And how long does that seller want to carry the risk of that? So is the seller going to want to wait to have themselves paid back over 4 years, 5 years? It's always, as a buyer, it's in your best interest to extend that for as long of a period of time as possible. So if you can extend it for 5 years, 10 years, then you may want to do that. But usually buyers are not going to be open to extending that beyond 3 years. Another thing that's become far more common in the industry with a couple of larger players is the opportunity to roll equity into the business. So you could approach somebody and say, hey, you've got $1 million business. So instead of giving you $250,000 down and then financing the balance over 3 years, what if we rolled that $250,000 down into equity in my business? So now you're moving from being an acquirer, which is, selling that potential owner on the idea of selling you a business, to becoming someone who's pitching the idea of your business growing value over a period of time. And then they would be able to reap the value of an exit at a later date. So that's usually the way that these deals are going to be structured, either all cash, seller financed, or a portion rolled into equity of the acquiring company.
So one of the things I want to jump in here is when somebody explains to me, essentially structuring the deal and presenting an offer, I think the big word here is all about risk. As a buyer, you're buying the future cash flow of the business, right? Like I wouldn't buy something unless I expected to get some sort of future cash flow. And that's what you're buying is that future cash flow. And so when I think about risk, I think about, well, what is the risk of me not getting that future cash flow, right? And so am I assuming the risk of not getting that future cash flow? Or are you as the seller assuming some of the risk of me not getting that cash flow? And so when I think about, let's talk about like owner finance. Like owner finance is the seller basically assuming some risk, right? Because there is a risk of you not paying them back. If you put in like an attrition clause or a clawback, they're assuming the risk of owners leaving. So the potential should be there for them to make more money. If you're putting all the risk on me as the buyer, then it would make sense that I'm going to discount the value because I'm assuming some of the risk, right? I need to essentially, you're not going to get as much money and I need to pay myself for that risk. And so, so if somebody says, hey, I want an all cash offer, then I would pay less for that business. So hopefully that makes sense. And so the way we think about that is we're constantly moving those levers. And when we make an offer, we kind of say, well, what is important to you, seller? And if it's more important to have a big headline number, then we're more than happy to do that. But we may want to put some sort of clawback, attrition clause, we may want to ask them to sell to seller finance all or a portion of it. So that's how we think about the offer.